Hello and welcome to another video. I'm in the woods and today I'm going to demonstrate how to make pine pitch glue. Now I use the term pine pitch loosely because I can't actually guarantee what kind of trees we're going to find in this woodland. Obviously there are lots of different types of pine and things like that, but generally we're just looking for coniferous trees that exude resin that is obviously sticky to the touch, and we'll collect it up and we'll see what we can do with it. So we've walked along for less than 30 seconds and we found some resin. You're looking for resin, you'll usually find it sort of hard, in the sort of hard crystallized form on the trunk of trees, and resin is basically secreted wherever the tree has had an injury. It's like its natural way of plugging an injury to prevent infection. So with that in mind, whenever you harvest resin, make sure that you don't take too much, and also don't take too much from one tree. So in order to collect your resin, you're going to need two things. The first one is a knife. This one, as you can see, is covered in resin. This is my designated harvesting knife because the resin, it sticks to everything and it's very, very hard to remove from stuff. So this is my sacrificial knife. The second thing you're going to need is some sort of metal container. Now this is just an old tin. I think this had hot dogs in it. You could use, a tin from tuna, a little sacrificial metal canteen if you have one. Your natural alternatives, you can create a divot in a stone and you can heat up the stone in a fire and use that, or you could also use like a large shell as well, but just for the sake of this I'm going to use a metal container. We just walked a little bit further, we found this tree here, and see there's plenty here, so I think this is where I'm going to harvest from. Just using my knife to break off little pieces, but I'm not digging into the bark in any way because I don't want to actually damage the tree. So you can see here, this resin is actually still a liquid. So we've got our container with some resin in the bottom. Let's go turn it into glue. We've collected our resin and we found a place to sit. So the next key ingredient that we need to make our glue is charcoal. Resin is very flammable, so as a precautionary method we're not going to be making a fire on the ground today. We're going to be using the pit just to keep us safe and to keep our forest safe as well. My feather sticks aren't actually very good. It's a skill that I think I need to work on. Excuse the terrible fire lighting shot. Good job this isn't a video about fires. Fire doesn't have to be very big, it just has to produce some charcoal and be hot enough to melt our resin. It's flammable, so you need to keep an eye on it, otherwise it could randomly just go and burst into flame, and then all your hard collecting work would be wasted. So we're just gonna pop our little tin of resin, not right in the fire because it will just go straight up into flames and just combust. So we're just going to pop that just on the edge of the fire and I can already smell it actually. So you see how it's starting to smoke? That is something that you want to be very careful with, because when it starts to smoke, that means that it's heating up too quickly. So I've actually got my tiny little pair of tongs that come with the fire pit, so I'm just using that to regulate the temperature of the resin. Now if you wanted to, you could make a tripod and use cordage or a method like that and suspend the container at the perfect height so that you don't need to regulate it yourself, but perhaps that's a skill for another video. Hopefully you can see that it's starting to melt very, very slowly. There's a little sheen on the bottom of the container. That's good. While I'm waiting for the resin to melt, I'm just going to carve almost like a mini spatula type shape out of this stick, and this will be what I'll actually load the resin onto, and I'll use it to stir it and actually load the glue onto when we're finished. So it doesn't have to be, well, that's my fire popping there. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. It literally just has to taper, I guess, to like almost a chisel end so that it can grip the glue easily. That will do. Doesn't have to be anything crazy. Make sure that it's long enough, yes. And give the resin a little stir. As you can see there, it's starting to melt quite nicely. That tells me that it's almost ready for charcoal. So I've taken my resin off the fire for a second so I can pull out a complete piece of charcoal that's absolutely red hot, and I'm going to put that to one side on a piece of wood to just cool down. Another really important point to add when you're actually collecting resin is to try and get stuff with as little debris in it as possible, just because it makes your glue a lot more coherent, I guess. But obviously, ultimately, the impurities like the debris and bits of bark and stuff will be filtered out, but it's just easier, the purer stuff that you can get, then obviously the better. I'll try and show you without spilling it, but hopefully you can see that we now have a pile of liquefied resin. There's a little bit of debris in there, but that's okay. So now we're going to take that charcoal that we saved and crush it up into a fine powder. You can use your fingers, you can use a stone. You just need to get a hard surface that you can powder it against. You don't want big lumps like that, you know, great big nodules. You want as fine a powder as possible. So this would also be the point where I would recommend removing any large pieces of debris if you can. Obviously don't burn yourself. So giving it a good stir, and then now I'm just going to add a tiny little pinch of that charcoal powder. Assuming that you've done it right, you should end up with something that looks a little bit like this. There is definitely debris in there, which is not ideal, but as long as your glue has a sort of shiny, glossy finish to it as it's loaded onto the stick, and a very shiny finish to it as it's dry, you're good to go. Now some people will add grass or, you know, some sort of fibrous material to this because it can be quite brittle, but for any project that I've used this stuff for, I tend to find that just the charcoal and the resin on its own will suffice. Another thing to remember is that this is a primitive hot melt glue, so that means that it is activated by heat. So if you want to actually use it, you need to actually reheat it over a fire, or, you know, a heat source like a lighter or something like that. Because it's a primitive hot melt glue, it's hard to load up the stick with the glue straight away, so you have to kind of dip the stick in the container, give it a little swirl, let the glue actually solidify on the stick, and then go back into the container again so that you can fully load the stick up. So some of you might be thinking to yourself, that does not look like glue. So let me just demonstrate. So there you have it. In order to remove it again, you need to carefully melt the glue without burning yourself. There we go, but you see some of the glue's actually come off there. I'll stick it back on again. And that's it. Stuck back on again, but in a different place. So glues like this have a number of uses, from securing arrowheads and helping with bindings on things, to waterproofing equipment and patching holes in stuff. It's actually a really interesting material, and it's definitely a good skill to know. My most common use for this is stone knife making, so I'll fit a point into a handle, bind it, and then I'll seal the whole thing with this glue, just so that it doesn't move around. You can heat it up in your hands and manipulate it if you need to, but best practice would be to use a fire. And obviously now that it's completely cold, it's absolutely solid. But anyway, that's all we've got time for today. So if you like what you see and would like to see more videos from me, whether that's fishing, bushcraft overnighters, or more skill videos like this, then let me know. I'd just like to take a moment to say hello and thank you to all my new subscribers. You are appreciated, and yeah, say hello in the comments if you're a new sub. But anyway, that's enough from me. Thanks again, and I will see you in the woods.